What's up, everyone? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with the overall markets, talk about some big news that came out for Nvidia and Apple, talk about what the charts are looking at for SPY, Tesla, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers, and break down what I think is going to play out for the markets. But let me just mention that I am not a financial planner. Make sure you take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire community as a whole. So what's happening with the markets right now? As you guys can see on SPY, we have this head and shoulders like structure, and we have some negative catalysts that are coming out for the weekend for the markets, not to mention some risks of more. So let me talk about the news. We have some big stuff coming out, and I'm going to talk about all of these different charts. So the first thing I want everyone to remember is that tomorrow is going to be Monday, August 5th, 2024. Okay, 15 minutes after the market opens, we have the S&P Global Composite PMI and Services PMI coming out. Might cause some volatility, but the main time to watch for volatility because of a data reaction will be 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 30 minutes after the market opens. We have the ISM Services PMI, ISM Services Business Activity, Employment, New Orders, and Prices all coming out. Expect some big moves because of this. When the manufacturing numbers came out on Thursday, the market saw a big dump. On Friday, the unemployment numbers came out, the market dumped. And then for Monday, we have the services numbers coming out. This will likely not be too good considering how manufacturing was looking. This does put the market at risk. On top of this, there was a lot of news coming out about Warren Buffett. Data has come out that they essentially held about $277 billion in cash after slashing a lot of their stock holdings, especially for stocks like Apple. That's some big news. That's some negative news for stocks like Apple, seeing that Berkshire Hathaway reduced a large percentage of their position, especially when you look at the way the charts are looking amidst the high interest rates and such. So, this is some negative news for tech, especially stocks like Apple. And then for Nvidia, we have some huge news that just came out right now. Nvidia is reportedly delaying its next generation Blackwell AI chips. And that's some big implications for the sector. So they're basically delaying their next gen AI chips by at least 3 months. There's a massive shipment delay, and we may not see this happen again. We may not see massive shipments until early 2025. On top of this, there's been some talk about how NVIDIA told Microsoft that they found another design flaw in the production process. And this is some negative news so far. So we want to be very, very careful with this, especially for NVIDIA and many of these chips. So this could have a big effect on the market, especially as we're starting to see a slowdown in these semiconductors. So not the best of news. I want to just call that out. This makes me a little bit apprehensive. And then for earnings, we had Berkshire Hathaway announcing earnings. We have Palantir on Monday. Tuesdays when we have Uber and a few others. Wednesday we have Shopify, Walt Disney, and Robinhood. Thursdays when we have very minor ones like Lilly, not to mention SoundHound. And Fridays also very minor as you have Nikola. But there's nothing else that's too crazy, at least for this week in terms of earnings. Uh, for other pieces of news, don't forget, guys, that there's a lot of stuff going on in the Middle East. This could still affect the markets. It does lead to some fear. We may see some temporary reaction if something were to happen in terms of an escalation of attacks. So that's a little bit concerning. The threats are still there, so we'll just have to see if something happens. And then we have other indicators like the real-time SAMRL recession indicator that's starting to rise because of unemployment going up relative to what we saw before. This tends to be associated with recessions, looking at the rate at which unemployment is increasing. So that is another concern, that the economy is slowing down, that we're starting to see these different factors weighing in, and it's having a big effect on the chip sector. It's having a big effect on all these different sectors out there. So this makes things a little bit more concerning for the markets. So what do I think about the charts? Well, we have a head and shoulders like structure on SPY, and this chart does look more bearish. But like I said in my previous videos, let's not turn too bearish just yet. Let's watch our levels for confirmation to determine if we're going to see a big move to the downside or not. And to put it simply, if we were to get a rebound, hypothetically, you want to see SPY break 536. If we break 536, we could push up to fill this gap towards 541. But if we lose 528, we're going to be dipping all the way down easily to, I personally don't think we're going to stop at like 524. I think we'll be going all the way down to 519 to 520 if we were to lose 528. Okay, so those are your levels to just keep in mind for SPY. But in my personal opinion, okay, when you look at the smaller time frames, SPY was making attempts to rebound. I'm not sure if we're forming a flag or not. So one could presume that we might retest 533 in the pre-market, maybe go a little higher. it depends if it could break 533 or not. But then ultimately, depending on the data and what kind of reaction we get with all this negative news, there's still that high risk of downside. Okay, it's still there, especially once we get this data. So I think we might consolidate, maybe try to push a little higher towards 533 in the morning. Could we go up to 535? That's a bit of a stretch, but it's always a possibility. I'm not going to count on that, but it's always a possibility. If we do manage to break 533, we could turn back up to 535 plus. Just keep that in the back of your mind just in case. But just note that I don't favor that move is going to last. We might see a little rebound in the morning, and then we might get a big rug pull after that because of all this bad news from Nvidia, all this news involving the Middle East, the news involving Apple. There's a lot of bad news that's coming out. So it makes me a little concerned. And I think that there's a risk of downside in the charts because of this. So I wouldn't be surprised if we attempt to rebound in the morning. And then once we get this data, especially at 10 o'clock a.m., whatever the reaction is, we're going to see a very, very big move, which may favor the downside, a move and a retest of 528, if not a lower level, as we could see a rug pull. So, in my opinion, the most likely possibility is, well, always be prepared for the bullish and bearish cases in case, depending on the levels we break. So, I just want to program you guys to just be prepared for anything because the market could be unpredictable. But I just want to say that the chart is favoring the downside. That's my final view. The chart still looks more bearish to me. And if we do get a small little rebound on SPY, I still think that there's a risk of us dipping back down towards 528 and maybe even getting a big rejection and failing to hold that. I still think that's a risk. So a small rebound and a rejection after that, possibly after 10 o'clock a.m. when this data comes out. And I think that all this news involving Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway reducing their positions, Nvidia having once again a flaw in their production process is a little bit negative for the markets. So that makes me, once again think that there's a risk of more downside. So with that being said, I think that uh, things are very, very concerning, at least involving all those different factors. If you look at ES, we've been down quite a bit. If you zoom out of the chart like this, I'm going to zoom out and look at the 4-hour time frame all over again. The 4-hour is also looking kind of concerning to me. If you look at this, we have a head and shoulders as well. And the full measured move would take this all the way down to about the 5200s. So that's more probable. But we have this support we're kind of testing right now at 5340. That's where we tried to hold right now. This is where this yellow line happens to be. Considering that's a strong support, there's a chance we rebound tomorrow. Look for a little rebound on ES, and we'll see if we get a big rejection or not. We might attempt to retest, the 5360s again. And then if the move fails, expect a rug pull, and we'll be dipping all the way down to the 5200s. If we do manage to break past 5400, we could try to rebound, but the most likely possibility is we rebound a bit and then eventually get a rug pull. I still favor that. Looking at the charts, looking at all this bad news, so just be careful. For SPX, it's kind of tricky because on SPX, the 4-hour 200 EMAs are support. If this holds, we could attempt to rebound to about 5368. And if we lose this support at 5300, we're going to get a rug pull as well. So be prepared for anything because we are testing our 200 EMA and watch 5300 for key confirmation. My gut is telling me this pushes a bit and starts dipping back down to retest 5300. If that breaks, this could be dipping all the way down towards the 5200s, the low 5200s. So I do see a risk of that on the charts, and I'm a little concerned about all this bad news. For Nvidia, unfortunately, this might get a rejection. I'm getting some very, very bad news. The trend is clearly bearish, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. And what else I noticed is that when you look at the daily on Nvidia, check this out, guys. We have this big gap down here. So if we lose 100, this thing is going to get rug pulled to 95 pretty fast. Okay. And we look more bearish. The symmetrical structure is just looking pretty weak. We have a double top like structure. So to me, the chart's favoring the downside. Now, it looks like it wants to rebound for the short term to retest like the 110, 112 area. Is it possible? Sure, it might be possible, but I'm concerned about the bad news that came out. So we might pop a little bit and then eventually start dipping. And I do see a risk of us coming back down to our lows. I do see a risk on Nvidia, guys. So be careful. Lo and behold, Bitcoin is dumping right now. It's dumping. It's down almost 5% amidst all this bad news. And the full measured move would take this down to about the 56,000, excuse me. So we look more bearish on Bitcoin. For Tesla, When you look at Tesla, there's a downtrend being established, and then I also called out the key level in my previous video about that 194 area. So if you were to theorize that this is a symmetrical structure on Tesla, so if you look at the 4-hour time frame like this, right, um, you will notice that our support was at 194, right, and that's going to be a key level for Tesla. Now, if we were to get good news and reclaim 215, yes, Tesla could rebound, but that's not looking as probable. In my personal opinion, I think what's very probable is this: Tesla may attempt to retest 210 or so, maybe even 212, and then reject. And then we could continue to dip down to 205, if not the lower 200s. I do see that as a risk, especially if you have this gap down here in this imbalance. So I think Tesla may rebound and then dump as the most likely possibility as the trend is more bearish. But if we do reclaim 215 and close above it, we could try to bounce. But I do see a risk of Tesla kind of rebounding then dipping, and I do see a risk of more downside. If we end up losing 205, we're easily going to be looking for a dump. So just be careful. Look for a retest of 210 in the morning, and we'll see if you get a rejection. For the triple Q, this looks more bearish to me. We've been dipping quite a bit, and notice that there's no sign of a bounce yet. We have a head and shoulders. We have this low down here around 444. We're still looking bearish. Now, if we reclaim 450, I'll be looking for 452. If we break that, we're going to be turning back up. If we lose 448, look for 446 and 444. If 444 breaks, the QQQ is going all the way down towards, I would say, the 430s, mid 430s easily. So I think going into tomorrow, the way we're selling off, there's a risk of more downside. And I think that there's a very, very good chance that the market could be dipping even more. So we could retest the 450 area. And then if we don't reclaim 452, look for a rejection. If we end up rejecting, look at 444 and then possibly downside. Might rebound and reject unless we reclaim 452, but this chart is still favoring downside. For Aapl, what's concerning is we have a head and shoulders like structure. If you look at this on the 4-hour time frame, it looks like this. So this could favor more downside. It's a little bit slanted. If we end up losing our 200 EMA all the way over here at 213, we could be dipping down all the way down to the low 200s. It's no surprise that Warren Buffett has been dumping his Apple shares for the last couple of months as Apple's been extended at these high levels. So be careful, guys. That's another warning sign. Could this head and shoulders lead to downside? It's possible. If we break 225, we're bullish. If we lose 220, look for basically 212 is our critical support. If we lose 216, and if that breaks, we turn bearish. This chart looks like it might dip a little bit, so just be mindful of that. Now, let me go over a few more. I think I'm going to be kind of fast for the rest of these. Palantir looks more bearish. If we reclaim 25, we turn back up. If we don't do so, we could be dipping all the way down towards 23.8. I do see a risk of that. For the IWM, to be bullish, you want to reclaim 210. If we don't reclaim 210, we're dipping back down to 203, in my opinion. We have this imbalance down here, and we still look more bearish. So 203 looks imminent. For AMD, we're looking a little bit more bearish. There's a bit of a downtrend right here. I think if we manage to hold 132, we could technically try to make our way back up to about 138 and then reject. But with the semiconductor industry and Nvidia potentially getting some bad news, technicals might be wrong about that. And this might just kind of like push a little bit to about 135 and then reject and start dipping all the way down to the 120s. That's a strong possibility. For Coinbase, with Bitcoin dumping, I think that there's a risk of more downside. Now, if we were to hypothetically reclaim 210, we could rebound, but if we don't do so, there's going to be a risk of us dipping all the way down towards the 190s, 194 specifically. This still looks more bearish. For Amazon, we have not only a head and shoulders like structure, we actually dipped quite a bit. We dumped really hard after earnings. We're down like 8.7% for the day. So I think we might shuffle a little bit. This might actually build some strength and start to see some buyers defend it. I think Amazon might retest 166, come back up and just shuffle, not really do as much. Meta's at risk of dipping to about 482. If we bounce off that, we could rebound to about the 490s. If we lose 482, we're going to be dipping all the way down to the 470 area. So I see a risk of downside looking at this chart and looking at technicals. We look more bearish on Meta in my opinion. So with all this bad news, we'll see, but just be mindful of that. It could rebound in the morning, and if we end up, I think it's going to rebound and dip to about 482, and then we'll see if we lose 482 or not. I do think there's a risk of that, in my personal opinion. Microsoft's on a bit of a downtrend, rejecting off our 20 EMA time and time again. So this is a little bit concerning. And there's a risk of downside on the chart because of that. So still looks more bearish. We're just continuing to dip and dip and dip. I think that this might continue to fall. We have to try to reclaim 416 to turn back up. It might try to bounce a little bit to like the 412 area. And then if we reject, make sure you watch this 404 area. We got to hold that. If 404 does not hold, we'll be dipping all the way down to 400 in the 390s. So you want to be very careful. I think we look more bearish. We could rebound a little bit and then eventually make our way down to the low 400s. The chart is still favoring downside. To me, Google looks more bearish as well. There's no sign of a true bounce, especially as we have this big gap over here to fill. So I would say that the trend is more bearish overall. It is possible we retest like 170 or so, and then we reject and continue to fall. So this downtrend may lead to even more downside, all the way down to about the low 160 area. So look for a little pop and drop, and even more downside as time goes on. For DJT, in my personal opinion, I think that this chart is a little bit more bearish looking. We've been trading sideways in this range, but like I said before, just be a little bit more careful. We might retest our 50 EMA around this 30.64 area for a little pop, and we'll see if we reject or not. So be careful with that. The VIX is still on a breakout. We're going to see if the VIX continues to squeeze or not. It could be tricky, but the VIX is still looking more bullish, and the market is looking bearish as a result. The 10-year is dipping. That doesn't really matter as much. It's just because of the Fed potentially doing a cut. And the dollar, it dipped a little bit with the market, but we're going to be watching to see if we get a bounce or not. If we could try to make our way back up to about 103.6, I'll be watching to see if that ends up being the case. The dollar is still looking a little bit more bearish, so maybe the market will bottom soon because of this, but there's no sign quite yet. And I still find myself a little bit concerned about all this news. So please do not just jump into puts and short the market like crazy for no reason. You have to look for very, very good entries and be very, very mindful of how things are moving. Okay. So you have to be prepared for that. You have to be very, very mindful of the levels you're watching for and the direction the market's taking. And don't just YOLO into anything and then throw fingers my way if something goes wrong, because I'm not giving financial advice. I talked about both the bullish and bearish scenarios, but my warning for everyone is that right now the odds are favoring kind of like a pop and drop or even a rejection in the markets because of all this bad news involving Warren Buffett, involving Nvidia, involving situations around the world, and the data that's coming out. So look for a big move tomorrow, especially at 10 o'clock a.m. when all the data comes out. Technically, I would say the bears have a bigger edge. So give the market some time and watch for confirmation. Make sure you watch the levels I called out, see if they break or not, and then we'll see how things end up going. With that being said, I want to just say I thank you all so much for listening. I hope you guys have an absolutely spectacular rest of your weekend. Please heed my warnings about some warning signs that I'm seeing in the markets and also the news, and we'll see how things go. I want to thank you for listening. Have a great day, and peace out.